Hey folks, Colin here from Sumthins Recording, and today I'm going to show you how to check phase on your drum tracks. We're looking at one of the most important things when it comes to live drums today, and that is getting your phase correction right. But before we dive in here, if you are looking to dial in a repeatable workflow for getting professional sounding drum tracks, then I want you to go through my 3-step framework for Mixing Drums Workshop. This workshop is going to walk you through the 3-step process that I use on almost every single one of my mixes for getting professional sounding drum mixes right from your home studio. It is a 100% free to watch, on-demand video training, and you can get free access to it by clicking the link below in the video description. Now let's jump in here and explore phase correlation on drums. So kind of what we're going to do here, I'll start by playing you the drum track so you can hear what we're working with here on the drums. And we're going to go through each element of the kit, and then we're going to do elements of the kit together. So let me hit play here. You can see what we have flipped here already to begin with. And by the way, you can pull up those input controls. If you click the little wrench tool here and then check input tools, you'll get an input gain for each channel, and you'll get a phase flip for each channel, which is a really nice feature here inside of Studio One. Let me start by playing you the drum tracks here, and then we'll dive into each individual piece of the kit and then the kit as a whole. So here's our drums for this track. And by the way, these are raw recorded drums, just a little bit of limiting. You can see the recording EQ is still on here for each track. This is not a mixed song yet, so these are raw recorded drums, so you can hear the phase in its most natural state. So here's our recorded drums for the song. So, good sounding drum kit, good sounding room mics, has some roominess to it. The kick drum's fat, the snare drum has some power and some crack to it. Toms are nice and big, cymbals are crisp, so it's a good recording of a good kit in a good room. But if you don't get your phase right, none of that matters. So let's start here on the kick drum. You can see our kick drums, nothing's flipped here on either kick drum. They're both left completely normal here. I'm going to hit play, and I'm going to flip both of these mics individually here. Pay attention to how our low end changes on the kick drum here. Notice when I put one of them inverted, suddenly our kick drum loses that punch on the fundamental frequency, right? That 80 kind of hertz, that 100 hertz low end punch that hits you right in the chest, suddenly that evaporates. We have a little bit of sub area that comes in when we flip it, but we lose the big power right around the fundamental frequency, that kind of 70 to 100 hertz area where you're feeling it in your chest that makes the kick drum feel big, gone. That's what a kick drum sounds like when it's out of phase. It doesn't affect your top end so much, right? We don't hear so much change in the click or that top end attack, but all of our low end evaporates. Listen one more time here on the kick drum. So if you get your drum kit up and your kick drum by itself there feels like it's lacking some low end, try flipping the phase on either your in mic or your out mic here. And try both, and you want to try them against the kit as well. And see if suddenly that low end, that fundamental frequency area suddenly jumps up and you have more of it. If you flip it and you lose it, that means you're in phase. And you can also check your phase by looking, but I don't recommend just doing it by looking. See, we're pretty close here. And if you want to get really, really crazy with it just by looking, you can change the time here, right? So we could push our kick in mic kick in mic forward a couple samples to line it up perfectly with our kick out mic. But I've never felt that's necessary. I like to keep things as natural as possible here. So that's our kick drum. Now let's flip over to our snare drum. Here you can see I've got 3 snare mics. The snare top is a 57 on the top of the snare. The snare high is a Sterling S30, I believe. It's a cheapo Sterling mic. You can get it for like $50, pack of them at Guitar Center. And it's taped to the 57, so it's another top mic. But what that tells us there, 2 mics taped together with the capsules touching, those are going to be in phase. So if we flip one, we have to flip the other. And then our snare bottom, opposite the 57 on the bottom side of the snare drum, pointing up. So one's pointing down, one's pointing up. Just from looking at that, with one mic pointing down and one mic pointing up, they're going to catch the opposite phase relationship. So if we zoom in on our snare drum here, you can see here's our snare top moving right together here, but as one's going down, this one's going up, right? So we can see the phase relationship is flopped here. It's up, this one's down, this one's up, top ones are down. That's because the way the sound is working, right, when he hits the snare drum and it goes down, it hits this mic and comes back up to hit the top mic. So they're working in reverse there because of the way the mics are. Let me unflip these two here. And I want you to take a listen here to our snare drum without any phase flipped. And then I'll flip these two and you can hear what it sounds like when we invert our top mics here. And then I'm going to talk about why I'm inverting both of the top mics rather than just inverting the bottom mic. We'll get there in a second, but here's our snare drum. Hear that low end, that fundamental, that 200 hertz, that bottom end suddenly come back into our snare drum? Again, losing low end, that's the sign of something being out of phase there. The top end doesn't change so much. We don't lose any of the snares on the top end or so much crack, but we lose that bottom end punch there on our snare drum. Listen one more time, out of phase, and then I'll flip them. Flipped, suddenly all the weight comes back into our snare drum there. Now, we've looked at our kick drum, we've looked at our snare drum. We can talk about our toms in relationship to our overheads, our snare in relationship to our overheads, as well as our kick drum. We're going to start with the kick drum here, and then we'll move on to the snare drum. Excuse me. Almost couldn't swallow there as I was talking. Our kick drum here, we're going to check our phase relationship with our overheads now. So once you check each little piece with itself, right, kick in, kick out, snare top, snare bottom, that type of thing, you want to check it against your overheads to see if you need to flip your overheads or flip your kick drum together in relationship to your overheads. Now for me, I've never had to flip my kick drum very often, just the way we're recording drums here. The kick drum usually sits really, really nicely with our overheads, and when I flip it, nothing changes that much that it's necessary for me to do that. So take a listen here, and I'll flip our kick drum against our overheads here, and you can hear how it changes. You can hear the kick drum doesn't change overall very much. But now listen, we have our overheads in. Listen to what happens when I flip one of the kick drums here. So just the in or just the out. Suddenly our kick drum sounds very, very weak and very, very small. All that low end's gone. So we've checked our kick drum against our overheads now. That's sounding good. Now, talking about our snare drum against our overheads, this is why I'm flipping both top mics here. So if I flip the bottom mic here on the snare drum, then our snare drum is in phase with itself, but it's still out of phase with our overheads because we have our two mics above the kit pointing down at the snare drum, and then we have our top and our bottom. If I flip the bottom mic to be in phase with the top mic, then our snare drum's in phase with ourself, but it's still out of phase with our overheads. So for me, the easier route is to flip both top mics to be in phase with the bottom mic as well as the overheads here. So take a listen to that. We'll start with them in, and then I'll flip our top mics out. So when I flip just the bottom mic there, you can hear we get a little bit of that low end back, but it's not as much as when we flip the two top mics against our bottom mic, because that puts our top mics in phase with our bottom mic as well as in phase with our overheads. So then all three elements are in phase rather than just, the bottom mic being in phase with our two top mics. The whole package comes together rather than just our snare drum, okay? That's why we're flipping those two there. Now, toms, for me, again, don't change very much just because of the way we're recording the toms. I can flip them either way, and we still get about the same sound coming from our tom mics here. So take a listen, toms against our overheads here. Not too big of a difference, not something that we're like, oh, it's going to make or break our tom sound. Everything we've talked about so far will make or break your drum kit, but sometimes little things like your kick drum compared to your overheads or your toms compared to your overheads doesn't change enough for you to make a really hard slated decision of like, okay, it needs to be flipped. Now, something that I do every now and then, I don't mess with it very often, is flipping the phase on the room mics. So take a listen to the room mic as I flip it against the entire kit here. This can make a little bit of a difference, and like I said, go through and check everything, and if you want those little differences, leave them in, right? If you feel you get more low end with your toms flipped or with your kick drum flipped against your overheads, leave that kind of thing, and you can go really, really in depth. You can chase it down a rabbit hole and check your kick against your snare and your snare against your toms, that kind of thing, but don't go too crazy with it. Find the big picture, find the big moves, get your kit sounding good, and move on. This kind of thing here with the room mic was a little move that I threw in because I felt like it gave the snare drum some more crack to it and a little bit more bottom end on the kick drum. Now that we have everything in, I want to show you what happens if we throw a couple of these elements out of phase. So I'm going to play the whole kit, and then I'm going to flip the kick out of phase. You can hear how it affects the whole kit, and then I'll flip our snare out of phase, and you can hear what the kit would sound like if our snare and kick were out of phase. It makes a big difference. Hear how weak our kit sounds now? Because our main elements, our kick and our snare, aren't in phase. This is how big of a difference getting your drums in phase can go. So now let's go back here one more time, okay? I'm going to play the drums out of phase here, and then I'm going to click the phase switches, put our snare drum in phase, and put our kick drum in phase. Listen to the difference here. By flipping the phase there on our kick drum and our snare drum, we get all the low end back in on our kick drum. We get all that bottom end, that weight back in on our snare drum. It cracks harder, it hits harder, and our kick drum hits you right in the chest. This is the difference that phase can make on your drums. I hope that was helpful for you. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if you're ready to take your drum mixes to the next level and really start dialing in a workflow that is a repeatable process that you can use on every single drum mix that you tackle, then you need to go through my 3-step framework for Mixing Drums Workshop. It will help you dial in a repeatable workflow for cranking out professional sounding drums each and every time. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.